Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5-Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
What is happening, Rush Nation? We are back. I am excited to bring this. I'm going to be fully transparent and say this is a pre-record. We're not doing this live. So if you are watching this live, first of all, thank you so much for all the love and following live. And if you're wondering why we don't respond or bring up your comments, it's because this isn't technically live. This is a pre-record. So all information we discuss in this show is accurate at time of recording. And if something big goes out, then you'll be able to work out when this was pre-recorded. Hopefully, but it's not too far in the past, I will say that. Also, big thanks for the love for some of the announcements we put out this week with our new co-host Danny joining. Excited to get going with him next week, and we're going to have lots of great in-season content, and he's busy behind the scenes this week setting up lots of things. So appreciate all the love that you've given him and all the support. We're really excited to have him on board joining us in the NFL show that we just launched. Thank you for the love on that. 3 episodes underway and more to come. So yeah, appreciate all of that. But enough me waffling on. I've got a phenomenal guest known very well in the UK community and in international waters too. And we're very, very excited to have the co-host of TH Fantasy Football Podcast, nominated twice for Sports Podcast of the Year. It is Mark Pestell. Welcome to 5-Yard Rush for the first time. Been on your show a couple of times, but finally get to have you back on here. How are you, my friend?
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, eager for the season to kick in after many, many drafts. Obviously, at this point in time, we're working our way in the midst of redraft season. So, yeah, really exciting off-season of fantasy and raring to go for the actual fantasy season to kick off proper, as does the NFL season.
Not long, week to go when this goes out. So we're really excited for that. Last draft's winding down now, and yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Because people like you and me, we've been drafting 6 months or so, pretty much in all different formats, and it kind of gets to the end, and you get that sigh of relief, and then 2 weeks into the season, you're like, "Oh, actually, I've kind of missed drafting now." No, maybe you don't. I don't know. That's how I feel.
Oh, every decision I make is the correct one. I think I tend to find
that. So look, we did the draft plan part 1 with Joe Dolan of Fantasy Points last week. We looked at players that we love at ADP, players that we don't love at ADP, players we feel are a good opportunity to outperform the ADP. And part of that is to get you thinking about your roster build, your roster construction. But with Pestell here, who very much is into the tactical side of the game, as am I, we're going to go into sort of some lessons that we learned in 2024. We're going to bring in a sort of a real blueprint plan that you can take into your home league drafts this weekend, next weekend, and really sort of get going, or next week, I should say, before the draft and the season kicks off. So, but before we do that, let's get people knowing a little bit about you. So how did you get into fantasy football and then ended up becoming a content creator?
I think for me, my journey into following the NFL was quite a long one. I grew up playing rugby, so NFL, American football was the ridiculous thing that I wanted nothing to do with. But kind of after finding kind of my way into that, then so a lot through playing Madden on the PlayStation, to be honest, is what really got me into NFL and watching it properly. Ed, my co-host show, he was in a couple of fantasy leagues. So he said, "Oh, why, John, we've got a Space John to jump in. Yeah, I'll have a little go at that." Playing Premier League fantasy football as a kid, I thought, yeah, that's a nice little thing to bring back in as a bit of a hobby. And then, as a huge proportion of the fantasy community will then say, during COVID, what was there to do but to draft? So that's where I kind of really got into doing a lot of different leagues. As far as then moving into kind of producing our own stuff, we were really fortunate through Stateside Sports, which is an online card trading group. Put out fantastic stuff with card breaks and selling sports trading cards. We met a couple of people there who invited us on to be on their show. As Owen invited us onto the Field to Fantasy show, and we spent time there until eventually those boys invited us to our own slot. with them. We started off doing the Sunday Night Bet Club, looking at all things fantasy betting. Well, NFL betting, fantasy is very much our strength. Betting is not. So when we do our betting show, drops in a couple of days, take it with a pinch of salt. And then we ended up moving out onto our own thing last year, and over this off season moving onto YouTube as well, which is something we've thought about for quite a long time. My background is in product and graphic design, so I very much enjoyed doing all of those bits for our show as well. So for us, it's kind of been opportunities, kind of next steps. Do a little bit of fantasy, let's do some more fantasy. We're doing lots of fantasy, enjoying the content that we're consuming with other people. Let's do a bit of our own, try hand it. And very fortunately, people are engaging with that. That's helping us to move on our charity league as well. Much as yourself, that's a platform to kind of give a little bit back into the fantasy community and beyond. Yeah, in a nutshell, that is me, and that is TH Fantasy Football.
It's amazing. You've raised over £8,000 for charity. I think the last time I saw, I think that's still accurate. For is it the Beeston Cafe?
Beeston Memory Cafe, which is an amazing local charity, local to Nottingham, which is not for where we're from. Med and I both live in Derby, as does Tom. And they do great stuff supporting those living with dementia and their care as well in the local area.
Yeah, phenomenal. And I think it's really interesting is I'm starting to know more and more fantasy players and fantasy content creators in the Midlands. You guys are there. I'm not that far south of you in Northamptonshire, and there's a few of us in Cambridgeshire and stuff. We all need to get together and do a live draft.
It's the hub. It's the fantasy hub of the UK.
That's it. Screw London. Like London's last year's news. It's all happening in the Midlands. There's a big shout out to the Midlands who've never had any positive love about anything in their lives before. So, excellent. I always like to ask this question. In terms of, I always think that different people when they play fantasy, especially when they're creating content as well, have a bit of style. So, talk to me a little bit about your sort of style and strategy for fantasy football, how you approach leagues, what's your sort of ethos in terms of how you construct your teams and what you kind of look for to get an edge over people in a fantasy league.
I think for me, it changes a little bit every year. And obviously we're going to be talking a lot on this show about lessons from 2024. And it's important to look at what went right, what went wrong. But at the same time, I can't remember what show it was I've heard on over recent years, but someone who said, do not draft last year's best team. That was last year's best team. But you can still learn some of those bits. So I think I was very much, in my draft days was very much a hero RB truther. I always wanted as many great RBs as I could because why not? Why would you not? Last year, as I kind of moved away from that. I think something that's become a learning curve for me over the last few years with doing more leagues is learn how to modify your strategy depending on the roster, depending on the type of league you are in. For example, on the whole, I'll always say, ignore bye weeks, deal with that when it comes. You don't need to win every week. If you're decimated 1 week, as long as it's not the playoffs, you can ride that. Drafting a guillotine league this week, I need to look at the bye weeks. So, it's very much deciding what is important in each of those different things. And I'll be completely honest, I think I've learned the most from making mistakes. Same with very different avenues of life. That didn't work. That went horribly wrong for me. I think the one thing that I do try to, I don't know if try to keep what just happens, is I like drafting players I like as well. Fantasy football is a little side story to watching the NFL on a Sunday for most of us. And I want to cheer on the players I want to cheer on. I don't want to be watching certain players and going, they've scored but it's helped my fantasy team. So very different things. But I'd say my strategy is fairly fluid depending on what I'm doing. But drafting players I want to cheer for and enjoying the process, I think is at the core of what I like to do for drafts.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's amazing. And I think it's a good way to get into pieces and do that. I always say to people that playing fantasy is a lot cheaper than betting on the NFL. So you can kind of construct the team you want to construct and you can cheer for them. And if it doesn't win, it hasn't cost you much, if any money at all. So if you like that and that's your strategy for betting and it doesn't work out too well, try fantasy football because it will cost you a lot less. Let's get into the lessons of 2024. And, we put this sort of doc together. I sort of outlined some pieces, and this is a show I've kind of done over a few years now, and it's kind of seen some evolutions, and there's always some pieces that I think surprise every year that we have to kind of take stock on. There's some things that I talk about every year because no one else does, and I feel like if I don't talk about it, no one else does. And then I think there's some pieces here that are in complete contradiction to previous years, and it's actually like we need to probably call this out, not because we necessarily think that this could happen again, but actually it's something to heed in case it does, and it's something to be aware of, so that you have got all the information that you need to go into your drafts and create your plans. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to shoot for people here. So, where do you want to start? I'm going to let you the guess. We got a number of points here in our lessons from 2024. Where would you like to start? Because I don't think we need to go through the binary top to bottom on our list here.
Well, I think we start with the most important position in the NFL, but not always the most important position for fantasy, and that's obviously QB. So you kind of put the point about waiting on the QB approach and those are the elite separators that we've got. And I think it's really interesting when we look at our draft. Ed and I often say I will very rarely get the top tier QBs that I would love to have, as would everybody, because that's not necessarily how I go about building my teams. But last year, looking at the 4 quarterbacks who went in the first 4 rounds, so Josh Allen ended up QB2, Patrick Mahomes ended up QB11, Jalen Hurts through injury and kind of playing through injury ended up QB8, and then Lamar Jackson ended up QB1. So you've got a 50% hit rate there for getting value back. Looking at the top 6 in 2024, though, so Lamar and Josh Allen have already mentioned. Joe Burrow was going as QB7, Baker Mayfield going as QB21, Daniels going as QB12, and Goff going as QB15 when we're looking at ADP. So there is also a lot of success there at a much lower price. Now, we could throw in lots of players that people waited for late and were sure were good sleepers, and we're going to definitely about. I think lots of people were very bullish that Kyler Murray was going to be back doing those elite numbers consistently last year, and it didn't happen. But when you get it right, it really can be a league-winning tack. So looking at that, tier 1, Lamar was on his own. He was 3 points per game over Josh Allen last year. You then look at Allen, Burrow, and Mayfield, a point separating, well, 1.1 points per game separating them. You're then down, that's a whole point per game more than Daniels, and then that drop down after that becomes a bit more stark. If you drafted Patrick Mahomes at the cost last year as the QB2, he was returning you 18.4 points per game, and that really hurt you. So, yeah, I think I've still never quite settled to say, if you go early on Lamar and Josh Allen and it works out this year, fantastic. You are laughing all the way to the playoffs. Get it wrong with Jaden Daniels, carrying on as we saw last year, and we see a CJ Stroud-esque sort of narrative, that could hurt you. Wait later and pick a player up that's not going to have that solid. So if you've then wasted that and you're then back to the waiver wire as well. So yeah, the elite separate themselves massively last year, and Lamar and Josh Allen feel relatively safe, I would say. But people thought Mahomes felt safe last year, and look what happened there.
Yeah, Mahomes is a strange one. I almost think he is the anomaly to the prep. And I feel his ADP is reflected by casual drafters, not real drafters.
Yeah.
And that's no slight to anyone listening to this who drafts in 1 or 2 leagues at all, by the way. But what I mean by the casual drafters is those that do draft in 1, 2 leagues and don't do a lot of research. They know that Patrick Mahomes is an NFL MVP candidate most years, that he'd come off the back of winning 2 Super Bowls. But actually, Patrick Mahomes' performance in fantasy football since 2021 has been meh. And I don't know anyone in the space that was drafting in 15, 20 drafts that was taking Patrick Mahomes there. And I think that his ADP in the offseason was significantly lower than it was towards the end of the season. So I think like his ADP narrative is very binary. And I think it escalated in the last 3 weeks of draft season. And I think that people are smart enough mostly to understand that you're not going to get your draft return on Patrick Mahomes. Having said that, more people are more bullish on him this year than perhaps they were last season, but his ADP is lower. We talked about this in the draft plan show last week, so go and watch that with Joe Dolan, where I can't get there on Patrick Mahomes. I haven't been able to get there for a few years. I think the body of work states who you are in a fantasy perspective, and you can be a really good quarterback and really bad for fantasy, and that's absolutely fine. Jameis Winston is a really bad quarterback who is really good for fantasy. You know, these inverse worlds can exist where both things can be true. And so I take the point, and I agree with you and so many of it. The Patrick Mahomes one, I think, is that slight anomaly. But I also would go consistently and say that ADP is a very good reflection on the position of predictability most of the time when you take injury out of it. I think Jalen Hurts would have been in the top 4 last season had injury not prevented, and I think he's a top 4 quarterback. He's going 4 this year. You feel that feels pretty good. You know, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, as you said here, CJ Stroud. I think there's a lot of circumstances there that allow that to happen. Anthony Richardson's just a big whiff at QB6. That everyone, I mean, like, he was the player I talked about the most last season, saying I just can't get there. But, you know, it is what it is. Joe Burrow, as you said, went well. Kyler Murray, I know it wasn't brilliant, but he wasn't that far away at QB8. You know, Jordan Love had injuries, Dak Prescott had injuries, and then you got the kind of Daniels is the one. And again, of all the rookie QBs, he was the one that everyone thought would do really well. And 12, no one could see him getting to where he finished. But he was the one that everyone kind of was going for. And again, those kind of what I call people who draft like a lot more were more bullish on him, and his ADP was kind of brought down by the later bits. So again, in a world where there is a predictable trend here with quarterbacks, people were picking Daniels over Williams. People were picking Goff, you know, at 15, but it wasn't actually that far away from the Tuas and the Herberts of this world. And then they rightly faded Rodgers, Cousins, Stafford. Baker Mayfield, for me, is the one that I think everyone whiffed on. And Bo Nix. They're the two, actually, I would say, that everyone in that late round pool really whiffed on. But except for those, you kind of... there is that tier of getting good quarterback play, and the argument is that you could easily pick up a quarterback that can do reasonably well, but then breaking into that higher number is hard. There is a guy every year, there is 2 guys every year that get up there, but you got to be really confident in your plan to get there. So the argument is 100% there that you can wait and get guys, but I think the other argument is that you've got to really be confident in the person that you take, and hopefully this draft plan with the other things we talk about will help you identify who those players could be this year.
I think the order was about there. As I said, it was I think last year more than most, you saw the tier 3, 4 quarterbacks perhaps getting pushed up around or so higher as well. And that's kind of perhaps that little bit of a reach on. I need to get now. I think when you see some of the elite go off, you maybe inflate the value of the next couple of tiers, thinking, I don't want to be left with, and then looking down as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think there is this element here where you get a run of QBs that start to go quite quickly. And then that causes a panic at the position. And I think, again, your point has got to be that you don't panic. And I would say there's definitely some really good late round QBs that you can pick up. Joe talked about last week, Drake May. That's a player who I think stands out in that sort of bucket tier of a player who could easily, and I have some reservations, I stated those, but I still think I look at that bucket tier of bargain basement kind of late round draft picks. Justin Fields, we know for fantasy football is something different. He's a cheat code. Not a good quarterback, but a really good fantasy quarterback. And so, you know, there are guys there in those sort of later tiers that can pick up points and get values for you. Trevor Lawrence under Liam Cohen might be a really interesting person to break through and finally see some of this talent that we've been waiting for so long. So there are guys down there, but I think you've just got to be really tactical in who you get and when you get them. And I actually think that if they're your guys, you actually have to reach for them, because I think they are so few and far between. And you decide to wait. If the ADP on them says round 11, I think you've got to go up a round and get them. Because I still think at round 10, you're drafting him as your lead QB. So I still think reaching at 10 to get Drake May and taking him around over the ADP or a round and a half over the ADP is not a bad play if that's the guy you're anchoring and you're strategizing going into the draft of, I'm going to walk away with this draft. And I think Drake May is a top 7, top 8 QB and with upside. And so I think if I can get there and get him, then I think you've got to commit to getting him a bit earlier and then building your super team with those sort of strong picks in the first 9 rounds to get him. Because I think what you don't want to do is wait on ADP and then miss him, and then your plan kind of falls apart. I think if you're going to commit, you've got to commit to going up.
And I think at that point as well, you're then prioritising your starting QB over another bench spot.
Over your RB5 and RB.
When you're looking at perhaps that kind of those couple of tiers above, you potentially then prioritising that slightly higher risk over your first flex or your running back or your wide receiver. And there's a same with anything. Everyone has the right value at the right point, no matter whether they're elite or whether they are borderline useless. Everyone has a value at some point, and it's just working out when you're happy losing out on something to get the thing you're going to go for, isn't it?
The other thing is as well is ADP and draft value dies the moment the draft ends.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you draft, and I say this on so many shows. I hate it when you try it. So what I did last year is I took a load of Jaden Daniels as my second QB. And then I started trading him in leagues, and people weren't prepared to pay a premium for him. And I'm like, you're talking about a top 5, top 6 QB at the time. So it's fine, I'll hold him. And then I end up starting him in leagues. People are like, oh, but you drafted him in the 10th round. I'm like, that's irrelevant.
Mm.
That ship has sailed. Like that ends the moment the draft ends. Where I drafted him is completely irrelevant to the conversation that we're having, which is we're a guy who is in the top 6 of QB scoring, top 5 of QB scoring. I'm offering him to you for a trade for a significant wide receiver piece or a significant running back piece. And people didn't want to do it, and that's fine. And they'll probably regret that trade going forward. But ultimately, I think, it's the thing that people get stuck on in a trade. Well, you drafted him there, so he's worth that. Like, no. It's not binary like that. It's a fluid situation where value goes up and down every single day. The second that Brian Robinson Jr. gets traded, his value will go back up again. It's all of these sorts of things that, the value of players is not binary. It is a constant fluid motion. And you just don't need to have in your head when you've picked your team where you drafted them. It doesn't matter. And draft value going into the draft doesn't matter. If you're anchoring a plan on a late round QB and you have a target in mind, then make sure you get the target. And I think at that point, past sort of 6 rounds, relative value position doesn't mean as much. It means more, maybe round 7, round 8. If you're getting guys, if they're falling in ADP, and you go and take them instead because of their value position, I think is fine. But I think people get stuck on, I need value, that they just think, well, I've taken him 15 spots over ADP. That's not a value. That's a reach. And people are scared. People are scared of reaching. They're like, oh, well, I just don't want to take value. But if you are projecting him to be a top 8 QB, think about where the QB8 is in the draft. The QB8 in the draft is around about pick 66, pick 70. So if that's where you value him, that's his value. So any pick after that is a value in your board, in your mind. It's not what everyone else thinks. And this idea, and we've talked about this on the show for years, about groupthink and what everyone else thinks. They're not playing your fantasy team. Be contrarian, be different, and commit. And if you commit to taking players and don't worry about the value. If that plan works for you and that's what you want to do to build your team, then do it, because I think it's going to give you the best opportunity to succeed.
It does make you panic when you start scrolling down ADP on Sleeper, doesn't it?
Do you know what? I'm known for years in the community as a guy who's a little bit down on Sleeper as opposed to everyone else. I love it in platforms where you can turn the ADP off.
Mm.
When you turn the ADP off, you separate the wheat from the chaff for me. And I think you really get people to zero in and see who's done the homework. Who are the people that live and breathe this and have a plan and stick to it? I almost think the ADP gives you a bit of a cheat code. a little bit, because then you've got this safety net of, oh, I completely forgot about this guy existing. But then you watch when players' ADPs significantly fall, or they're very low and they haven't risen yet in line with news, then you see the people who have paid attention and those that haven't. So it does work both ways, I suppose. But I think it's a good point on QB, and I think it's a great debate. You know, Joe Dolan's in your camp that I think QBs you can wait on. There's plenty of guys there, and I get that. I just think for me, I love that Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield tier that you get this year, because I don't think they're so out of touch with the top four, but you're getting them at a significant discount. So I think you can build your team of wide receivers and running backs or tight ends of get 5-6 rounds and then get one of those two. And I think the discount you get from them to the next four, and I think they're the nice sort of that bridge zone of quarterback from the elite to the hopefuls. And then you got these two guys who you know are going to produce in that range. And I think they represent excellent value this year. So there is that argument of you can wait, but not have to wait as long and go get one of those two, because they're in a nice little tier almost of their own. I wanted to talk about everyone's least favorite subject, which is injuries. Now, we've had this trend for a little while that there seems to be more injuries at the top end of the board than there have been in previous years. I really think this trend has kind of come since COVID. I talked about in the fantasy playbook this year that running back injuries have come down this last year versus other years, but we still saw significant impact to Christian McCaffrey. Jonathan Taylor missed a couple of games. We lost wide receivers for a significant amount of games last season. Mike Evans missed 4 games, I think. Chris Godwin missed games. Lots of players missed time last season that were kind of taken in those sort of upper 3 rounds. What are your thoughts in injuries for drafting purposes? Are you ones that you're a little bit concerned about previous injury history? Do you kind of ignore it if they're healthy now? What's your kind of view on injury?
I'm concerned about players coming off injuries where there is evidence to show it takes a while for that injury to get you back up to speed. I also don't believe at all in the idea of being injury prone. I think we have heard countless times actual people who know their stuff when it comes to actual sports scientists, people who actually understand biomechanics, people who understand all that thing, saying you can't be injury prone. However, you can put yourself into situations that there is a higher risk of injury. So there's certain things where you look at that play style would concern me more than kind of injury. I forget about it. We know so many players are going to get injured. CMC isn't worrying me from an injury point of view this year. People aren't drafting CMC because they're angry with him, because it's his fault. He personally chose to inconvenience people's fantasy rosters last year by being injured. You look at the numbers last year, he said about wide receiver. So looking at the wide receivers drafted in the top 24 that missed significant time, AJ Brown missed 5 games, Puka Nacua missed 7, Devontae Adams missed 4, Olave missed half the season, Ike missed half the season, Evans missed 4 games, Nico Collins missed 6, Stephon Diggs missed half the season, Cooper Kupp missed 6 games, Devonta Smith missed 5 games. You can't predict it. You can't then, I'm not going to draft any top 24 wide receivers because last year nearly half of them got injured. You've just got to be prepared to know in season. You need to know this when you're drafting. You don't have to think, right, if they get injured, who I'm going to get for. You just got to then be active with that and deal with that in season and understand who is next up and if they have better value than players on other teams, maybe. But yeah, I think there's some players I will look at there. So Nick Chubb last year was a good example that we knew he was going to be coming back in season. We knew he wasn't going to be Nick Chubb, but we also know because of any knee injuries with running backs, there are lots of data points that show it takes you a year or so to get back up to speed. He didn't have a knee injury. He had about 7 knee injuries in the same knee. His knee was decimated. He was never going to get back up to what that, and obviously, sadly, had another in drafts that as well. So Nick Chubb, although we see Mixon potentially out, is someone that I'm still thinking he's still not very far removed from that significant injury that we know will impact him. Whereas I'm not looking at, I suppose I was about to say Mike Evans. Mike Evans, we know, loves a hamstring injury. But once again, that's a stylistic thing rather than an injury-prone sort of thing. But yeah, I'm not overly worried about that. You just have to make sure you've got enough depth in the team. I mean, Jerry Jeudy ended up being wide receiver 12.
Yeah.
If you drafted Jerry Jeudy, injuries you're very happy with last year. It swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
His ADP is ADP 33.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane. Like, it's genuinely insane that people are literally looking at players like that and going, nah, not interested. You know, Cortland Sutton, nah, don't want him. I genuinely like Zay Flowers is another one. Nah, I don't want him. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. But I agree with you. I think too many people play on fear. I said in the Patreon cast last week that if you are sitting at like the 1-7 and you don't take Christian McCaffrey, he has an RB1 season and you don't win your league, I don't want to hear from you. Don't come crying to me, because that's a player that if he plays 17 games is going to be a top 3, top 4 running back. Now I can take the argument of I want to take Bijan over him, I want to take Gibbs over him, I want to take Barkley over him. That argument I will buy all day long. Like, I don't agree necessarily. I have Chris McCaffrey as my running back too. But fine, like, you know, we're splitting hairs at that point. Derrick Henry, if you want to go for the safety security blanket kind of fruit, I don't hate that either. Outside of that, like, if you're taking Gene T in the hopes that he's going to be an RB1 in his first season, like, it's in the one overall. A-Chan with that terrible Dolphins team, Bucky Irvin, who's going to have competition. I can't help you. Like, you're playing in fear, and that paralysis of fear, I think, really hurts people significantly. And I think you said it right. They're angry about last season. They're angry about before he burned me. I took him at the 101 and he's cost me a league. And I get it, but emotion is going to be one of the biggest killers of fantasy teams every year, because yeah, look, we probably take it too seriously, and that's fine. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we like winning and we want to win. And I think you've got to take the best players for your teams. And I'm prepared to take a risk on players, especially when they're 100% healthy. Like, Christian McCaffrey is the healthiest 49er offensive player right now. Like, he everyone else in that team, with the exception of George Kittle, is pretty much hurt, has some form of injury designation, has some form of injury report notice on them. Christian McCaffrey's healthy, he's good to go. Like, he's fine. Like, if he gets injured, that's bad luck. That's not, as you said, injury prone. That's bad luck. And you have to accept the fact that that is in the range of outcomes when you take any single player in any position in the NFL in a fantasy football league, that they can get injured. And if they're coming into the season 100% healthy, then you have to just look at talent over anything else, because I think that will be your greatest guide. So if they've got an injury designation coming into the season, you should absolutely pay attention to that. If they don't, you should absolutely just release the fear and just let it go. So I agree with you 100%. And as you said last season with wide receivers, it was unprecedented. I don't think we're going to see that again. I think there will be injuries. I think there will be significant injuries. And as you said, you've got to plan for it. You've got to draft deep, which is why if you go with your sort of draft plan of going QB late, you can get in your opening 9 rounds, if you wanted to say fade tight end, and that's a different discussion altogether, you get yourself 4 running backs, 5 wide receivers, and then get your quarterback. And all of a sudden you're like, well, if I get an injury, I'm fine because I've got depth. Or you go 5 running backs, 4 wide receivers, whatever. Or you get a tight end in there and you've got 4, 4, and 1. However you kind of want to build your team with that QB late, you're going to have the depth to cover your injuries. And if a guy goes down, next guy's up.
For running backs especially, you've just got to be at peace with the fact that the running backs you draft will likely miss at least a couple of games. When you're a very fast human being running into massive human beings, there's a chance you're going to get hurt at some point. And we can also pretty much guarantee one of the top fantasy producers at running back this year is currently sat on everyone's waiver wire. Every year it happens, because it'll be next man up an injury. It'll be a surprise package, a la Bucky Irving. There will be someone And there will also be, when you look at your flex spots, the majority of the best flex producers will also be sat on waiver wires at the start of the season.
Yeah.
Like you said, once you've done the draft, you need to forget about where you drafted them. You then need to find the best player available on their weekly value in your lineup. And if injury is part of that, so be it. The same way you might have to drop a player for injury, you might have to drop a player if it turns out you're wrong and they're having a bit of a rubbish season. You can't predict that any easier than you can predict injuries.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think this ties on nicely to the next point, and then I'll let you kick off one, which is about running backs in general and chasing this sort of rookie young performance and chasing these younger RBs versus sort of the more sort of longevity running backs. If we look at last season at the running back position, it's really interesting when you look at it, because Saquon Barkley was quite easily the running back one by a country mile, and he was a player who wasn't being picked there at all. You look at and again, it kind of depends on your scoring statistics, but Saquon Barkley was one, Derrick Henry was two. Derrick Henry's like pushed 30. So you're sitting there thinking like, okay, this is straight. You got Jahmyr Gibbs up there. And again, it kind of depends on what your scoring system is when you look at these players. And I always take out week 17 because if you week 18, because if you have week 18, then Jahmyr Gibbs is up there. But Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry in your top four last season, Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan sort of pounding the table for the younger running backs. But then, let's give a shout out to some of these older guys. Josh Jacobs, running back 6, and he's kind of not old, but he's also not young. Alvin Kamara finishes RB8, and he missed the final 2 weeks of the season. James Conner, RB11. Joe Mixon was RB13, and he missed sort of 3 or 4 games, and he finished terribly as well. Aaron Jones, RB14. These are all David Montgomery, RB17, Jonathan Taylor, RB18. He missed time in the middle of the season. Tony Pollard, RB21, Najee Harris, RB22, J.K. Dobbins, RB24. There's a lot of players here that are older that produced last season fantasy winning performances that were largely ignored at ADP because of their age. And this hotness of you can't draft a running back that's over 28 years old. And I just think that's rubbish. I just think it's rubbish. And last season kind of proves it. It's just these guys are healthier, they're stronger, they're completely different to where they were 10 years ago in terms of sports science and medication. You can elongate positions. And I buy a little bit into the touch argument that so much tread on the tires. I get that, but I also just think that sometimes talent just prevails, and Derrick Henry continues to just defy odds. Every season Henry's going to drop off this year. Henry's going to drop off this year. Yeah, he's had one bad year, and that's when he was injured, and it's an injury that could have happened to anybody. But he continues to defy predictions, and he still goes underneath his fantasy value every single year. He always outfinishes his ADP. What are your thoughts to the age of running backs, and do we just put too much stock because of dynasty in younger running backs?
I think that to kind of link a couple of bits that you got in the show notes, so I want to link in the idea of some of the running backs changing situation, I think did feed into that as well, because the way the contracts were, it was some of the higher end, older, we talk about 30-year-old Derrick Henry like he's actually old. Saquon, it appeared to be fading over his previous season at the Giants when he finished up as RB13. We all thought that was a Giants thing, but were we certain? And he was going to be contesting for goal line work with Jalen Hurts. Derrick Henry, obviously, he's very, very old. And will he produce anything alongside Lamar Jackson, stealing the work from him? With Justice Hill there, kind of taking snaps at different points as well. Jacobs is the Packers, and people had question marks about that, and he's had an inconsistent 2023. Mixon, I do feel Joe Mixon is one, particularly there's a bit of that name fatigue around, and I felt he's been undervalued since his horror season 2020, where he wasn't great and got injured. I don't think he's ever return to the right ADP value. So I think, there were some of those question marks there as well that with hindsight, everyone was wrong on and there was nothing to worry about. I feel particularly there is too much stock put in rookie running backs last year. And we know that this year is a very different crop of running backs. This running back class is head and shoulders above last year's. But in flex, so looking at running back 36 to 48 on ADP at the end of last season, Jonathan Brooks missed most of the season. Trey Benson finishes RB 69. Blake Corum finishes RB 79. Jalen Wright finishes RB 91. When you're then looking at kind of players that you could have had around then, say J.K. Dobbins, it was, for me, as someone who's watched Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins as a Ravens fan, it was ludicrous to me. Gus Edwards going so much higher than J.K. Dobbins. But once again, that could have been down to Ravens bias if it didn't go the way it did go. I just think that outside of Bucky Irving, who wasn't being drafted, so he was going around end around 15, so it's 50-50 whether he was rostered or not in most redraft leagues. I think there's a point where people, the top tier names have gone and there are more question marks. And I think that the consensus often then is, I'm not sure. I'll take this rookie because you might hit gold. And I do feel that, yes, that could happen. And if you took Bucky Irving, you were completely right and that was the right thing to do. But chances are you didn't take Bucky Irving. And there's those four names you just said really did let you down at a key position and a key point in your draft.
I think it's really interesting with the running back position that people chase the younger players because dynasty season comes first. People have done all the research. People have researched the rookies. They've got excited about the NFL draft. They've taken part in rookie drafts. They've traded loads of picks and all these sorts of things. They've got excited about these players. And it's not just running backs, it's quarterbacks, it's wide receivers, it's tight ends, it's all of this, right? But I tend to find that there is since COVID, and I think, COVID and people drafting more and all this sort of element, that dynasties exploded. It's really sort of gone huge in the last sort of 4 years. And I think the dynasty mindset filters into redraft. And I actually think there is a contrarian play to just draft old guys and solid pros, and you could skip rookies and build a winning team. Now, I'm not saying you should definitely do that, but I almost think lean into the narrative. If you've just said, look at all these running backs last season, and again, it was a bad class. But it was the same with the wide receiver position. People jumped on Marvin Harrison Jr. He was going as a top 15 pick. And I can't remember how many people I had on saying, that's just a terrible value. Like, it's a terrible value. Like, he's never returning that. So you were drafting him beyond his ceiling. And the best case scenario is effectively you get your money back, that he delivers that level. And he never was going to. And people get so excited about the hype of these players that they buy into it, and it causes these sort of value tiers to go up. And we're seeing it with G&T. I don't think is that badly priced for what he could be on a team that's very bad, that there's not a lot of talent. So I don't mind his value as much. I probably swerve it a tiny bit for me at the back end because I'll probably take the proven commodity over the unproven. That's kind of how I play. And I think there's plenty of value around there for other players. But I look at Amari Hampton, at Trevin Henderson, and their value, their values are quite punchy in terms of what they could happen early season versus late season. I don't hate it, and I don't mind the approach, but I think you have to play the game differently in redraft dynasty. That I think it's okay to take old players. It's okay to take players that you know what they are, they know what they can produce. So I think that's a really important part of the plan. And I think last season defied a lot of odds in fact, the last two seasons, because the season before there was a lot of wide receiver movement in the market. And we had a lot of big wide receiver trades. We had a lot of big wide receivers moving free agency. And then last season was the running back year where all the running backs got moved in an unprecedented amount. They all got paid. And we've always been a bit scared of new situation, new quarterback. What's going to happen? Is it going to be just as good? Is it going to be, and in more instances or not, they actually outperformed because they were a valued commodity. They were a valued asset. And I think if you follow the money of the GMs, if they're paying these players, you can feel pretty good about what you choose. So yeah, I like that one a lot. And I think it's really interesting to tie that into the the OC changes and looking at schemes with looking at scheme fits, and I get this is a really hard thing to do for people. So I just think that you have to look at teams that historically are not big fantasy points producers, and you have to kind of just not take too many fantasy players from that team. More importantly, those deeper wide receivers. And you have to follow the changes of the OCs, and we'll get into that probably a little bit later. But in terms of last season, right, I've just pulled some stats from fantasy points data, and I'm sort of looking around slot usage, inline usage, mixed in with target back usage. Okay, so this is where quarterbacks are throwing the football. So we're using this data to kind of understand who gets the ball in from the quarterback. So I've sort of filtered it in by slot because I think that's the telling point. The Detroit Lions, for example, throw the ball out wide 44% of the time. They throw it to the slot 24.9% of the time, which is the bottom amount in the NFL. In line is 11%, which is very low. And their backs get it 20% of the time. So out wide and backs is 64% of the time, rounding up. So that tells you that their running backs and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams are going to get the ball 64, 65% of the time from the quarterback. So the slot, the tight end. Now, this might change. New offensive coordinator. There's not a big portion there for everybody else. So the Sam Laportas of this world, the third wide receivers. And that tells you there isn't a third fantasy wide receiver to support there. The data is telling you that Sam Laporta is going to take his out of that 35%. He'll get the lion's share of that. And then all of a sudden, there's nothing for anyone else. So that's, and other teams in similar situations, Denver Broncos, lots of hype about these wide receivers. I like the hype on Mims. I think if you're a Pat Bryant or the names just escaped me of the other wide receiver there. Who was drafted last year?
Franklin.
Troy Franklin. So I think for me, again, similar numbers. Wide, 41%. Back, 22%. Wide 42% if you round up. So that's 64% is going out wide to the backs. Inline, 10%. Slot, 26%. Not a lot of value outside of whoever that second wide receiver, which is pointing towards Mims. So if you're taking Bryant and you're taking Franklin, it looks hard from a point of view there to get some sustainability there. Philadelphia Eagles, again, new offensive coordinator for the third year in a row. 49% out wide, 15% to the back. So again, 65%. Then their slot, 26%, inline, 10%. Doesn't look good for a third wide receiver there. It's why we've never seen a third wide receiver be relevant in fantasy football there. The same with the Vikings. These are all very, very similar numbers. The same with the Steelers. The same with the Titans. The same with the Texans. Same with the Saints. Same with the Chiefs. All these numbers hover between wide and back, somewhere between 62 and 65%. Same with the Chargers. Same with the Browns. Browns is a little less. Browns is actually around about 53. So Browns is a bit less. But everyone else, again, those numbers kind of pivot to tell you there's not a lot of sustainability from those third wide receiver numbers. And so stop chasing the third wide receiver on these teams. It's a very narrow tree. It's a couple of receivers. It's maybe the tight end, maybe not the tight end, depending on the situation. The Chargers, not the tight end. Other teams, maybe the tight end. And it's the backs. So don't try and force something that doesn't fit. Because I think that's what we try and hope for. Oh, well, maybe this year they'll spread it a bit more. Maybe they'll change their... I mean, it just doesn't line up. If you follow the formations of these teams, they don't line up in loads of three wide receiver sets. They don't dump the ball out to the slot that often. So just be wary of that. I think that's something that we sometimes probably don't feel comfortable knowing, or we don't feel like we can get that information. So that's where the eye test kind of works a bit, and trying to get some of this data. Just look at where the balls, look at target data. You can get that for free on Fantasy Pros. Just look at target data the last couple of years and just look at like the third wide receiver and see what happens there. I think that's a big one. So I think it's something that we ignore every year, as well as the coaching changes. But I think, that's something to kind of highlight. So let's get into the summary of this. We got about sort of 10 minutes left. Where do you want to start on sort of summarizing the draft plan for this year?
I think for me, when I'm thinking about the cornerstone of my draft plan, I take away something that it was this time last year or the year before when you were on our show. You mentioned about having your own set of rankings. We've spoken about ADP earlier, having your own set of rankings with that, and I think we've kind of got better at in TH the fact that there's three of us, myself, Ed, and Tom. That helps as a good barometer for us to kind of work out a bit of a balance when it's one of us is being, usually me, being far too high or far too low on someone, and Ed and Tom help to level me out a little bit. And then you can spot where your values and where your picks are far too costly are for ADP. I think you mentioned well about sometimes just getting a couple of sets of data from analysts that you enjoy their content or you think tends to reflect your draft style or tend to be fairly accurate, and putting that alongside. And from that, you can work out where for you individually your best values are. So, for example, Saquon Barkley going off the board most places as RB1 and most places around the second pick of drafts. For me, I'm higher on Bijan than Saquon this year. I'm higher on Gibbs than I am Saquon this year, and I'm higher on CMC Saquon. Now, that isn't a huge degree of error. Chances are you could pick one of those, a couple are injured, it's all irrelevant. But for me, Saquon represents someone who is a little bit too costly in round one for me. The other side of that, CMC, currently going average draft is the first pick in round two. I'd probably start thinking about him at the 103. So for me, he is a player that is reflecting really good value if I can get him later on. Now, round one, obviously, is kind of very skewed. Looking a bit deeper then. So for me, two mid-wide receivers on paper for me currently, Ricky Pearsall and Emeka Egbuka, are two players that I feel quite happy taking as a wide receiver 3 on my team and having in my flex spot. Ricky Pearsall, current ADP 45. Emeka Egbuka, current ADP of wide receiver 49. Both going in round 9. Where we spoke earlier about your quarterbacks and being prepared to pay up a little bit, I'd be quite happy to draft either of those in round 6. Chances are I could get them for me at a value of round 7 or round 8. Two players that are too pricey. Rashee Rice. Obviously, we're at the time of record, we've recently had the news about what's happening with his ongoing legal shenanigans. He could miss 8 games after a difficult weeks 1 to 4 potentially for him as well. The fact that he is currently going as wide receiver 21 late round 4, I am not happy with in any way, shape, or form. I'm not drafting him. For me, he's in the region of wide receiver 45 to 50 sort of range because I'm baking into that he could miss a good chunk of time. You said Baker Mayfield for you was a value earlier. For me, I feel he's been a bargain. We've banged on the last couple of years. He's a bargain, and we've happily drafted him. For me, at QB7, that for me is his ceiling, and going in round 6 is the window where I don't really. If I've waited that far, I'm waiting a bit longer. I'm picking up a different player at that point. So for me personally, he's a player I have at QB11. He's too pricey for me. So I would say just go into, we've said about ADP. And if you want to go by ADP, that's how you want to play fantasy. That is what you enjoy doing. By all means, ignore everything we've just said. Because if that's how you enjoy it, then that is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what we say. If you're enjoying it, do that. But if you are wanting a bit more to think about it, have your own rankings, stick by those, and just know where you can get a value and know where it doesn't matter if that player is going off at this point. If you're not in on them, don't take them there just because you feel you should, because that's what consensus would dictate.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely massive and great advice. And I think I don't want to be the analyst to tell you where to take players. That's kind of not what the purpose of this show has ever been, and it's not what it's going to be now. And Pestell and I disagree, and it's fine to disagree on players. It's fine to disagree on takes.
Yeah.
It's about your process and building your process. The part of this plan isn't just to sit here, write down the names we talked about, and take those guys. The idea is to build your own plan. So that's build your own rankings. These are the things that we look at when we're building our plans for the year. These are how we plan to execute. This is how we plan to win. And these are all the really important pieces that we put together to try and win on a consistent basis. So I think it's so valid that every year you do some form of rankings. Even if you just take your favorite 3 or 4 analysts because you don't feel confident doing your own, and just build it in a spreadsheet and then create an average and go from there. Like whatever works for you, do what's right for you. I love that. I think it's really important to do that. I also put in here about quarterbacks, like look at ascending quarterbacks and not descending quarterbacks. So I put in here Trevor Lawrence, but then the situation has changed that maybe you want to punt it, and I'm fine. I'm not taking loads of him, but I will take a little sprinkle. But Dak Prescott, Stafford, Rodgers, Wilson, these guys shouldn't be on your radar, really. They should be guys that you let other people draft. In the Superflex, it's a slightly different conversation. You're taking them as your QB4, then fine. But ultimately, there's no upside to these guys. We know what they are. We know what the body of the work is. You're just getting the low side every time. I punt the under their ADP on all those players significantly. So I just think that we know what they are. I also say this, and this is something that people really drag on the beat writers, and they're like clutching on to what beat writers are reporting more than ever before. And actually, the contrarian take is that the beat writers are less in the know than they ever have been. Because the beat writers are watching the tape and they're telling you like, oh, who looks good, but they're also being heavily misled. The news that comes out, the significant player news, isn't broken by beat writers. It's broken by Rap Sheet, it's broken by Schefter, it's broken by Schwartz and all these other guys, Tom Pelissero, the Brian Robinson news. We didn't hear that from the beat writer. We heard that from the mouths of Rappaport and Schefter. And my point is, you can get sucked into what the beat writer is writing as an opinion to try and stay relevant. And there are some very good beat writers, and you can maybe take their information a little bit more solidly than others. But I just think the beat writer campaign is, you can put too much stock into it. And we've heard so many things from beat writers over the years. Jamar Chase is struggling to catch a ball without lines on it and stuff like that. That comes from beat writers, right? And it can actually throw you off. So as much good stuff that they uncover, there's a lot of negative trope that gets put out there that actually hurts your draft process. So I think that's one I would throw out there. And in conscious of time, I mentioned about offensive systems, that if we don't like the offensive system of coach, we probably should dial into that more. Alex Van Pelt and Ken Dorsey in 2024, they're at the Patriots and the Browns. And so people were taking loads of these players because they brought in rookies, they brought in young players, didn't really deliver for you because they're not very good offensive coordinators. They get fired consistently. They don't have a great history. Invest in teams with great offensive coordinators, like your Ravens with Todd Monken, who's an excellent offensive coordinator. Invest in the teams with the best coaching, with the best talent available to them, and great offensive coordinators. Don't just reach because you think the situation then might be different. If the coaching's bad, and we know the coaching's bad, let's just stay away from it. And let's go and invest in other areas. I think that's a big one. But that's it. That's the draft plan. Hopefully this is going to be really useful. Why don't you tell everyone where they can tune in to subscribe to the podcast and all the great work you're doing. I know you've got some contests on the moment, so go ahead and plug all those.
So we are available on X, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky as th_fantasy_NFL. So check us out there. And we have moved our content from our podcast format to our YouTube format now. So TH Fantasy Football on YouTube as well. Currently, we've got our 32 team deep dive. So if you're drafting late and you want to have a quick check out of those, then please do so. And then a few preseason shows lined up over the next week. And then our main show, making that a step from podcast to YouTube. So hopefully it will be both a graphical and audible delight for you if you join us in season, and maybe a little bit informative too. Yeah, TH Fantasy Football wherever you get any content.
Or give him a sub, 2-time nominated Sports Podcast of the Year. So make sure you give him a sub. Lots of great content and great work over there. Thank you so much for joining me, buddy. I really appreciate it. Next time you'll see us will be NFL week. We'll be talking about waiver wires. We'll be talking about our in-season plans, and we'll be talking with our new co-host, Danny. But until then, don't forget, as always, Rush Nation, keep rushing.